So, so, part two, and I'm refilming part two because I start rambling and trying to explain things that I don't fully understand yet, and I want to avoid that. So, yeah, let me give you my point of view without trying to explain things that I don't fully understand, haven't integrated yet. So, as discussed, the first set of operators and these anchoring conditions came out of the synthesis using NotebookLM of our ChatGPT conversations over the whole last year. And then once those existed, there's a lot of back and forth conversation with ChatGPT to clarify what these actually are and how they exist in relation to one another. And the first three created the process triad, essentially the basic unit of change. Reflective differentiation, translation, and threshold reorganization, which are, in sort of one way of putting it, is initiation, stabilization, and reorganization. Or a start, middle, and an end. Information in, information percolating, and then systems reorganizing when sort of their strain or their system is now at odds with their environment, for example. And notably, it's difficult for me to even talk about because any examples confine us to a domain. And this process of change, this cyclical nature of becoming, exists fractally across all of becoming. It's a basic unit of change. It's the basic unit of becoming. And the other three is what ended up being called the agentic triad, which is, as the name suggests, more related to our agency, more related to our stance in how our stance is coupled with change. And these weren't a cycle. They were more like three orthogonal directions of a topology of stance, right? Centered authority, has a somatic, almost dimensional nature of being centered versus outside of yourself. Energetic coherence also has the somatic element to it, right? You can feel whether your system is coherent and all of your parts are moving in the same direction, or if you're feeling fragmented and pulled in different directions, right? And it's interesting because neurologically, negative emotions are correlated with more localized neural sort of firing, whereas positive emotions, and particular things like love, are system-wide coherent patterns in the brain, right? So this notion of coherence versus fragmentation also seems to be a kind of dimension there. And then paradox tolerance has this feeling of openness, right? Like how open are you to your environment, and particularly how capable are you of staying open in the face of uncertainty, right? Paradox that can't be resolved at the moment or perhaps ever, right? So openness, centeredness, and coherence came out as these three fundamental, when I say fundamental, I mean like not obviously reducible dimensions to what it feels like as a being to go through change, right? So we can go through change more or less in a more or less centered way, or in a more or less coherent way, or in a more or less open way, right? And how things change and sort of where we are in our development will affect our stance. You know, are we more easily pulled off of our center? Does something trigger us or fragment us? And so on, right? So there's already these like two things. Before it was the process triad. I wasn't sure if I should call it the ontological triad, because it said something fundamental about reality, so on an ontological level how things change, but at the same time another perspective of the process triad was also epistemic. It was also how we gained information, right? Reflective differentiation is how we gain information by the reflective principle of reality, and how we can differentiate ourselves from reality through the process of translation, how that information sort of seeps through our different layers, somatic, emotional, cognitive, etc. And then how, as strain builds, or certain, you know, environment changes, strain builds, and then we have to reorganize, right? We have, you know, burnout is run up to a kind of reorganizational process. Maybe that looks like a midlife crisis, maybe that looks like a spiritual awakening, or it looks like an epiphany, right? So there's all these different ways in which parts of our system reorganize at thresholds. So process triad applied to our living experience feels like an epistemic process, but there's also something more ontological about it, as opposed to the agentic triad that describes, our participation in change. And we'll see later on that they're not really separate either, that the agentic triad emerges from the process triad, which is super fascinating. But now that we've got that, the operators sort of covered, I'm going to pause it there because I'm getting a call.